Hello everybody, this is Dr. Medicine RX and in today's video we'll be discussing about bullous pemphigoid. So bullous pemphigoid is an acquired autoimmune blistering disorder that is characterized by presence of subepidermal bullae and also deposition of antibodies and complement along the basement membrane zone. Where pemphigus group of diseases is characterized by intraepidermal blistering, pemphigoid group of diseases are characterized by subepidermal blistering. Coming to epidemiology, it commonly affects people of more than 70 years of age and it is rare in infancy and childhood. And etiology, there is some role of genetic susceptibility where HLA-DQB1 plays a role and certain environmental factors also play a role. And there are many triggering factors, certain drugs which cause drug-induced bullous pemphigoid such as penicillin, ampicillin, POVA therapy, NSAIDs, salicylates, ACI inhibitors, calcium channel blockers or sulfonamides or anti-diabetic drugs and even terbinafine and antifungal agents can cause bullous pemphigoid. Even UV light therapy or radiation therapy, especially in breast cancer therapy, can also be responsible. Certain thermal and electric even after some surgeries and certain infections such as cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr virus, HHV6, HHV8, Hep B, Hep C, H. pylori and toxoplasma can also trigger bullous pemphigoid. Coming to pathogenesis, the main important role here is the formation of autoantibodies to 180 kilodalton and 230 kilodalton proteins. So these proteins are important components of hemidesmosomes. So in the sketch on the right hand side we can see that there is BP230 protein that is present towards the cytoplasm of stratum basale, and BP180 is what that is connecting the stratum basale all the way up to lamina densa. So BP230, also called as bullous pemphigoid antigen 1, is a cytoplasmic protein and it anchors keratin intermediate filaments to hemidesmosomes, and it is a major antigen of bullous pemphigoid. Coming to 180 kilodalton protein, that is BP180 or the bullous pemphigoid antigen 2, it is a transmembrane protein, it is a component of the hemidesmosome, and the major epitope of BP180 that is involved is the NC16A domain. Even there are certain other components of BP180 that can act that are antigenic, but NC16A domain is most important, and it is a type 17 collagen. Anti-BP180 antibodies can be both IgG and IgE types, and in IgG, G1 and G4 type of autoantibodies are more commonly seen. So what happens is that autoantibodies are formed against these BP180 and BP230 antigens, and they cause complement activation which further activates the inflammatory cascade. Along with these, the complement proteins such as C3 and C5a and the IgA autoantibodies, they cause mast cell degranulation which causes release of mediators such as leukotrienes or platelet activating factor and TNF alpha, which causes recruitment of neutrophils and eosinophils. So presence of eosinophils is a hallmark feature of bullous pemphigoid, and neutrophils, they further release certain proteolytic enzymes which causes the breakdown of dermoepidermal junction, whereas eosinophils, they also release a matrix metalloproteinases which further cause damage. And of course there is also some role from T cells, Th1, Th2, Th17 cells. They directly or indirectly they produce inflammatory cytokines and also autoantibodies respectively and play a role in bullous pemphigoid. Coming to oral mucosa, why oral mucosa lesions are not seen in bullous pemphigoid is that the collagen 17 is present in higher amounts in oral mucosa rather than skin. So whenever pemphigoid depletes this collagen 17, it is compensated in oral mucosa because it is more in number, whereas in skin that kind of compensation is not seen, leading to production of blisters, and that is why oral mucosa is spared in bullous pemphigoid. Coming to clinical features, first off there is going to be a prodrome, the pre-bullous stage you can say, where there is some sort of itching and also rash on extremities, that is the limbs, and this rash is urticaria like or dermatitis like, and within a week, sometimes even after a month, generalization of bullous lesions, there is sudden appearance of bullous lesions and they become generalized, and they arise on normal or erythematous skin, and they are tense of more than or equal to 1 to 3 centimeter size, and they have a clear fluid. Sometimes this fluid can become hemorrhagic, or it can be reabsorbed, or it can rupture and leave erosions which heal rapidly with mild post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. Coming to sites, Symmetrical involvement is seen, and the lesions are more on lower abdomen or inner or anterior thighs and flexural forearms. However, these lesions can also be limited around certain stoma, or they can occur only on the irradiated areas when they are triggered by radiation, or they can also occur on the paralyzed extremity. They can be localized or limited to the umbilicus or to lower extremities, where it is also called as pretibial pemphigoid. They can be localized to palmoplantar areas, where it is called as dyshydrosiform pemphigoid, and it can be localized to the vulvar lesion, also called as localized vulvar pemphigoid, especially seen in younger girls. So in childhood induced bullous pemphigoid, this is also one of the variants. The Nikolsky sign is negative and bulla spread sign is positive. And there are certain morphological types of bullous pemphigoid, such as the pemphigoid vegetans or pigmented bullous pemphigoid or pemphigoid nodularis, papillor pemphigoid, lymphomatoid papillosis like pemphigoid, vesicular pemphigoid or erythrodermic bullous pemphigoid. So it mimics a variety of lesions. So it is also called as a great imitator, and various morphological types of bullous pemphigoid are present. Coming to investigations, first off is light microscopy. So pre-bullous lesions, that is the urticarial-like or the dermatitis-like lesions, they show subepidermal clefts along with eosinophilic spongiosis, and in certain cases eosinophilic infiltrate in upper dermis can also be present. So presence of eosinophils is a hallmark feature of bullous pemphigoid. Coming to bullous lesions, usually we choose a fresh bulla for biopsy, and it shows subepidermal cleft and dermal inflammatory infiltrate of eosinophils and neutrophils. And the blister cavity, it has eosinophils, neutrophils and fibrin. Coming to Zank's smear, there are no acantholytic cells because what is targeted is the hemidesmosomal protein rather than the desmosomes, and we can see certain inflammatory cells. On immunohistochemistry, C3D deposits can be seen along the dermoepidermal junction, and the most important investigation is direct immunofluorescence, where we use a perilesional skin rather than a fresh bulla, because there can be loss of immunoreactants in the blister fluid. That's why perilesional skin is selected, and perilesional skin DIF is a gold standard procedure and it is very sensitive. This shows linear IgG and complement deposits along the basement membrane zone. So fluorescence can be seen, which is linear and which is caused by IgG and complement along the basement membrane zone. Coming to indirect immunofluorescence, where we use the sera of the patient, IgG autoantibodies are seen along the epidermal slide. Similarly, salt split human skin is a better substrate rather than monkey esophagus, and similarly we can also use this test to differentiate bullous pemphigoid from epidermolysis bullosa equisita. Other tests include ELISA, immunoblotting, immunoprecipitation and immune electron microscopy. Coming to the treatment aspect, first is skincare and general measures. So for large blisters, we can prick and drain them using a sterile needle, and the blister roof is to be left intact because it acts as a natural dressing and helps in healing the lesion fastly. We can leave the small and medium blisters intact. Extensive erosions, in case of extensive erosions, antiseptic soaks and bath with potassium permanganate to avoid any super added bacterial infection can be done. Covering the raw areas of the erosions with bandages is necessary to avoid any infection. Diet supplementation is necessary in malnourished patients, and vaccination against influenza and pneumococci is necessary for any to avoid any seasonal infections. However, avoid live attenuated vaccines. Vitamin D and calcium supplementation, bisphosphonates in patients on prednisone more than 7.5 mg per day are necessary because there is a chance for hypocalcemia in patients on steroids. Coming to the mainstay of treatment, corticosteroids. So in very mild cases or any localized lesions, we can go for very potent topical steroids as an monotherapy. However, if there are many in number, then they are used as an adjunct. So adjunct to systemic steroids, we can go where prednisone in a dosage of 0.5 to 0.75 mg per kg per day is given. This range is necessary for extensive disease. However, if there is mild disease, 0.5 mg per kg per day prednisone can be started. If there is no disease control in 1 to 3 weeks, then the dose should be increased to 0.75 mg per kg per day. Once you start treating and if there is a disease control achieved in the next 15 days, taper the dose gradually to minimal therapy. Minimal therapy is giving 0.1 mg per kg per day of the prednisone. And this tapering should be carried within 4 to 6 months. And if the patient stays in remission when on minimal therapy, then continue this therapy for 3 to 6 months, and after that stop the corticosteroid. And other than that, we can also go for steroid sparing agents such as dapsone, azathioprine, methotrexate, cyclophosphamide, mycophenolate mofetil, leflunomide, chlorambucil, tetracyclines, and nicotinamide, IVIG, plasmapheresis, rituximab, omalizumab in non-responsive cases, or cases where there has been a relapse even after treating with corticosteroids, or where we have given high dose corticosteroids and the patient has still not responded as we like. Then in that cases we can go for steroid sparing agents. Thank you. Subscribe for more.